What is love? When I was very young, I decided that I did not want to get married no matter what. It was from seeing the hate in my parents' eyes as they fought nearly every night. Sometimes I would wish to be anywhere else except in that house. I saw love as a gamble growing up. When I started dating, I never gave my all into any relationship. It came down to my fear that I would become entangled with someone, fall in love, and they would hurt me. The thought of being with someone for the rest of my life scared me, for a long time, for I knew the heart was not to be trusted. My parents were living proof of that. It was difficult for them to even spend a day without fighting with each other. And after the fight, they would each come to me and try to get me to understand their point of view. But I was merely a child. Don't get me wrong, I love my parents, and they were good parents. I always had everything I wanted growing up, and their love for me was in abundance. But their love for each other dwindled with each passing year. I failed to understand why they kept on trying. I got tired of them coming home from therapy every couple of months and telling me that we were going to be a happy family from now on, but we never were. When I started dating, I did it because everyone else was doing it. I went along with what my friends were doing because I was scared that someone would see there was something wrong with me. I hoped that they would not guess that my parents were unhappy, and I didn't know how to love. I didn't blame them for it. It was a complicated situation. I had fleeting casual relationships that lasted for a week or so. I fooled myself into thinking the close friendships that I had with girls could bloom into something more, but once I found myself in those relationships, I felt trapped. Once she started getting clingy and wanting all of my attention, I retreated, but I didn't stop trying to fix myself, even though I was the one doing the sabotaging. No one knew this about me, except my best friend George. I had known George for several years. We went to the same school, got up to mischief together. We're practically brothers. George was the one in the world who I could spend time with and not feel as though I was pretending. He knew me as well as I knew him. When he was 12, George told me that he was gay. It didn't change my relationship with him. If anything, it made us stronger. That was when I told him the secret. That my parents were in a loveless relationship, they fought a lot, it just never got physical. When we were 16, someone told me that George liked me as more than a friend, and I didn't know what to do or say about it, so I didn't tell him that I knew he was in love with me. I was straight. I was convinced that I liked girls. Thus, I would not break George's heart, for I loved him, as he was my brother. He was the only person who knew my deepest pain and shared my greatest happiness. That was why, when my parents told me that they were divorcing, it was to his door that I ran. I didn't want them to leave each other, for they had been working on things for a year now. I had been almost convinced that they were going to fix things and be together, but all that had changed now in a matter of days. They told me that they had been unhappy for a while now. I asked them about how they had been trying to fix things. They informed me that they could not carry on. That was when I ran out of the house. I felt betrayed. It was all a sham. Love was a sham. Marriage was a sham. All of it. The only thing that was real was my friendship with George. I knocked on the door and his mother answered. She was a bit alarmed to see me, but she let me in nonetheless. I went up to George's room and I found him working on some music. I said nothing. I just tackled him and hugged him. I broke apart in his arms. He had that effect on me. It's done, George. My family's done, I quivered. What do you mean, Dan? He asked as he led us to his bed. My mom and dad are finally getting divorced, I managed to say. I thought they were fixing things though, he said. They said that they just could not carry on. They were waiting till I turned 18 and they would end their relationship, I explained. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say, he said. Love is not real. They are proof. I resigned myself to that fact. He managed to calm me down, but barely. I was struggling to come to terms with their breakup. I wondered why they had to end it now. I had been used to them being together for all my life, yet now our family was being broken apart. I thought of all the times I had tried but failed to find a connection with someone. How I retreated as soon as things started to get real. I had these cynical views about love which I was masking by getting into relationship after relationship. I couldn't get over how shallow some of the girls that I fell in love with were. They lacked depth. Or maybe it was just me who could not connect with them on a deeper level. It didn't even matter now. All I knew was that I was done with the cruel game that was love. My parents had suffered in a hell of a marriage for years, and I didn't want them to divorce? No, scratch that. It was a good thing that they were leaving each other. I had been afforded the luxury of actually being able to leave my relationships, but they had stayed. For me. They wanted to be such good parents that they endured mental and emotional strains of their married life. They endured endless fights that kept everyone awake at night. That night, George and I talked for hours. I was deeply conflicted about how to feel about them ending it. I feared that if I fell in love, then the same thing would happen to me. I would end up in an unhappy marriage. I never want to fall in love, I said in the dead of the night when I was sure that he was sleeping. But why? Love is beautiful, he said. It was easy for him to say. His parents were truly in love, and when he was in a relationship, he gave his all. I wondered how he could be so reckless with his heart like that. Sometimes I wondered if it had been true that he loved me, and what that love would feel like if I could love him back. And ugly too. I've only ever seen the ugly side, I said. He didn't answer me. He just squeezed my hand and we fell asleep. The next day, I was bombarded by messages from my parents, asking me where I was the previous night. I felt bad, but I was still mad. Not at them, but at the situation that we had found ourselves in as a family. I hated that I had been the glue that kept them together, and now that I was going to college, everything was undone. I got up, got dressed, and said goodbye to George, who was still half asleep. He looked so peaceful that I yearned to be him, without a care in the world. When I got home, I saw only my mom, and she did not look like she was doing well. She didn't even look like she had slept the previous night. We didn't discuss what had happened the night before. She just told me that my father had moved out of the house, and if I needed to see him, she would give me the address. Asked her if she was glad to be rid of that marriage. I should be, but there is emptiness that lingers. I wish that I had never gotten married, but the thing that I do not regret is having you. She said as she brought me in for a hug. I know, Mom, I just want you two to be happy, I said. I didn't go and see my father on that day. I could not deal with the sadness that I knew would come when I saw him. Seeing my mom was bad enough. As I was lying in my room, I couldn't stop thinking and turning over the events of the past few days. I had a bad habit of overthinking, and George swore it would drive me crazy one day. So I texted him and asked him if he wanted to buy some alcohol with me, which translated into him buying the alcohol for us. He was very tall, and often got confused for someone in his 20s, which was wonderful for us. He agreed, of course, because he would do anything for me. That's what I loved about him. No request was too much when it came to him. I changed my clothes and walked over to his house. I didn't feel like going to a bar, mainly because a fake ID never works for me. I always look younger than my age. I met him outside his place, and we went to buy some alcohol. I remember that I was feeling particularly miserable on that day, so I asked him to buy some gin and vodka. It was a wonder that we even woke up at all the next morning. After we managed to sneak the bottles in without his mom noticing, we got down to drinking. We played some music while we drank and talked about random things. The conversations I had with him when I was drunk were always the weirdest. He always brought out that goofy side of me that no one ever else got to see. Hey, you know what? We should dress up as penguins for Halloween, he slurred. You idiot, not penguins, pumpkins, I said. Are you high or something? He asked me. We did actually end up having a silly Halloween custom that year, but that's a story for another day. We were goofy like this for a while, just having a good time and not thinking about all the problems we had. I ended up sitting next to him, and I was leaning on him. I had stopped drinking a while ago and had switched to water. So, are you really not going to get into a relationship with someone again? He asked me. I don't know, man. Even if I do, it always ends badly, I sighed. Because you don't want to open up, he raised an eyebrow. I open up to you, don't I said. But I'm not your love interest, he shrugged. Though I saw sadness pass through his eyes, but I was sure that I was imagining it. I wanted to ask you something. Answer me honestly, I said. I'd wanted to know this for a while, but I never got the courage. However, something made me ask him that night. Shoot, he smiled. Someone told me 2 years ago that you were in love with me. I let it out. He froze for a few seconds, and I knew right then and there that it had been true all along. That my best friend had fallen for a sorry thing like I. Does it matter? It passed anyway, he sighed. How come you never made a move, I asked. Why are you so curious? He laughed. I was curious because I wanted to know what it would be like to be with him physically. Maybe it was because I had been aware of him all night. The curve of his plump lips and everything else about him. All this was probably being caused by the alcohol. He was my best friend after all. Would you have kissed me if you had the chance? I asked him. I could see the battle in his eyes, and I had a thrill. The buzzing from the alcohol and him, they made me feel so much more open, physically, and not emotionally, of course. I didn't give him a chance to answer, because that night, I just wanted someone to make me forget. Just for a little while. We're drunk. Let's not talk about something so serious, he said. I suppose that you're right. Thank you so much for today, and for all that you've done for me, I said, hugging him. He hugged me, and all the things that we had been speaking about were forgotten. That is what I liked about him. He made me feel happy. I think I'd like to sleep now. It's been quite the long day, has it not? I said. He grinned and agreed with me. But when I was laying there next to him, my mind was spinning as I thought of how unfair it was of him that he loved me in the past. I hoped that he had forgotten the crush that he had for me, and that my words had not reminded him of his feelings for me. The last thing I wanted to do was give him false hope that there could be something between us. I was not capable of love, and would only hurt him. He murmured in his sleep, and pulled me closer, making me the little spoon, and I smiled. With him, I always felt protected. I dreaded going home the following day though, because my mother would be there, looking sad. And I had to see my father as well, who was probably not doing well too. I fell asleep with so many thoughts about love, and what it truly was. The next morning, I woke up with a hangover from hell. There were some tablets and 2 glasses of water on the dresser. I figured that his mom had brought them. So much for keeping last night's escapades a secret. I woke my dear friend up because I was not going to suffer the hangover alone. He glared at me when I woke him up, but after drinking the pills, he managed to stop looking like he wanted to strangle me. Instead, he threw a pillow on my head. This started a pillow fight, of course, which were very common between us. It had always been our own way of resolving conflict. I got a message from my dad to come and see him later that day. He sent me the address. George noticed that my mood had changed, and when he asked why, I confessed to him that I had found it difficult to be around my parents. They were both so sad, and I couldn't do anything about it. I knew that they had been miserable in the marriage, but that didn't mean it was so easy for them to divorce. It was scary how they were on better terms when they were divorcing than when they were married, but being around them made me feel sad. George was very emotionally supportive throughout my rant. I was struck by how lucky I was to have him in my life. If it wasn't for him, trying to keep me positive all the time, I would have fallen apart long ago. After dreading it for a while, I went home, changed, and went to visit my father. He actually looked a lot happier than I thought he would be. He was living with an old friend from back in his school days, a guy named David. I spent the rest of the afternoon just chilling with my father and David. I was glad that he had someone who was helping him out. Before I left though, my father asked me if I was holding up okay. "Yes, of course I'm okay, Dad." I managed to smile. "We still love you, and you are our son," he said as he hugged me. "But Dad, does love exist?" I asked out of the blue. "Why do you say that, son?" he asked. "You and Mom," I started. "Please don't give up on it because of us," he said. I left soon after to go hang out with my favorite person in the world. I thought of my father's words, and how wrong he was. How was I to believe in love when it was not always beautiful? I had never even felt a flicker of love in my heart. I was certain that I would just spend the rest of my life making meaningless relationships. Not because I had no hope. I didn't know what it was. George talked of this pure love. Love which could withstand any obstacles. Well, I had yet to see it. I laughed when he told me about it. That was until I was forced to look at it, and to actually believe in it, by falling for the person I never thought I would. To be continued.